it's obviously different, watching a kid take infield in a workout than it is in a game, because the kid's, looks all pretty dancing around at
Sure.
shortstop, and you're like, yeah, it took you like 7 seconds to get the ball out to first base. Like he's safe. Doesn't matter how
Right.
smooth and fluid you look.
Welcome to VeloUnlocked, the podcast for baseball players that want to play at the next level. Baseball is already one of the most difficult sports to succeed in. Our goal is to dive into as many areas as possible, both on and off the field, to give you the upper hand against your competition. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Velo University for much more. In this episode, we are joined by Ben Badler. Ben has written about prospects for Baseball America since 2007. He covers minor league prospects, international signings, the MLB draft, and underclass high school prospects. Ben is also the co-host of the Future Projection podcast. We hope you enjoy.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and getting here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fired up to be here and chat with you guys.
Yeah. So our market is certainly that high school, college realm. We tend to get a lot of guys from that. We obviously still have pro athletes, right? But most of our guys have graduated out of the college and high school into the pro realm, right? And those are the pro guys that we work with the most. But I know all of them are going to be super excited to listen to this and hopefully get that one nugget out of you that, tells them how they can become the next superstar. But let's, before we get into all that, tell me how you got into this. Because I know it was 2007 you started with Baseball America, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, basically ever since I was a little kid, I was just addicted to sports. I mean, as soon as I learned how to read, I grew up in Boston. My parents would get the Boston Globe, and I would just yank out the sports section right away. Go fold it all out on the kitchen floor with breakfast, and just read through every box score. So I always knew I wanted to do something in sports when I grew up as a career. Knew pretty quickly that was not going to be on the field, on any field or court for me, but. When I was applying to schools, I was applying to schools based on, who had the best or who had sport management programs. And I was very fortunate that I grew up in Massachusetts, and UMass had a really good sport management program. So it was a good fit. The price was right for the in-state tuition. So I went there, and then out of college, I graduated in 2007, got an internship at Baseball America. They're based down in Durham, North Carolina. So went down there. Later by the end of the summer, they offered me a full-time job. So I got started there, moved all the rest of my stuff down there. Now I'm living, up here in the Northeast again. I've been up here for about the last 10 years. But yeah, I've been working at Baseball America for 15 years now, covering international, pro, the minor league prospects, and then all of, high school or underclass high school coverage, and especially kind of drilling down deep here this month on the Northeast draft guys right now.
Yeah. So what a really cool trajectory there, and transitioning that sports management into now your capacity to really deliver information on everybody. And I've read through so many of your different tweets. I read through a bunch of your articles today, and then over the weekend listened to some of your podcasts, and the passion just comes pouring out of you to talk about all these different facets, and just you can tell the sports junkie that you are, and how vicariously enthusiastic you are about each one of these players, history, their position, where they're headed. It's super cool, and it must lend so much into how you rank these guys, right? And how you view them as being a prospect. To you, what stands out the most when looking at, let's say a high school guy, right? Mm-hmm. When you're initially seeing them, what stands out to you the most typically out of one of those guys, other than, let's say, I don't know, sheer talent, sheer the ability, from a pitcher's perspective, the ability to throw hard, right? That doesn't take somebody who's a junkie of the sport,
right?
And more than just an enthusiast to realize, hey, wow, that kid's got talent.
Yeah, I mean, if we're, and it obviously kind of depends on the context, right?
Yeah.
Of, you're looking at a high school senior, you're looking at different things than you might be for, somebody who's, 15, 16 years old, right? So, yeah, I mean, obviously, velocity is one part of the equation. But again, if we're talking about a pitcher, looking at, how they're built, obviously, is one factor. If a kid is, you know, an early physical mature player. He's 6 feet. He's already 215 pounds. Like he's built like a linebacker. All right, maybe there's not quite as much physical projection still there to come. Whereas somebody who's maybe the same height but is 155 pounds and it can be distributed in different ways. If but he has broad shoulders, you can see he's got a lot more room to add weight, add strength. Where okay, maybe he's not throwing quite as hard as that other guy right now, but you can see there's a lot more room to project him to get stronger and start throwing harder, and for all of his stuff to kind of tick up once that strength does come. But yeah, looking at delivery, arm action, feel for spinning the baseball, throwing strikes. There's no like cookie cutter one size fits all for everybody, but some of the kind of the components you're looking for, especially for looking for kind of starter traits too from a young pitcher, which doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, you have to have 3 polished pitches right now, because most see a kid at 15 years old, he's probably just learning
Right.
A changeup at that point. Some kids do have pretty good changeup at that age. It's pretty unusual to see and definitely jumps out. But you're looking for especially the younger you go, just kind of like the building blocks for somebody you can project to be a good starting pitcher down the road.
Speaking of the changeup, and I know you're fond of that, just listening to a couple of your other podcasts there, I've actually found it at the high school level difficult to throw it because it makes sometimes a bad hitter better. Okay, so now the emergence of technology, right? So tech has obviously blown up in this sport of late. We'll call it the last like 5 to 8 years. How have you seen that start to shift the way you guys rank people?
Yeah, you have a lot more information at your disposal now than we did even a few years ago. There's just much more information, whether it's coming from a TrackMan or somebody setting up a Rapsoda or some other hit tracks, whatever kind of device there is. We see it at the big events. So everybody, not everybody, but there's access to that data that you can get a little bit more granular and nuanced with the way a pitch moves or different characteristics of a pitch. And you can have a lot of it too, and you can kind of track and see how those changes work over time. So it's definitely been a change and a factor, and especially at the high school level, right? Like you're not getting it for every high school game.
Sure.
It's more some of the bigger events or showcases, or at a facility like the one that you guys have. But especially for when teams are looking at the college players, it's almost ubiquitous now,
right?
To have the data on all those guys, and certainly for all the minor league players that we're ranking. You can get all the it's TrackMan or Hawkeye, all the exit velocities and all the different metrics that you're looking at to be able to evaluate these guys.
Have you seen any scenarios where not having data on a guy has potentially like hindered his ranking?
Possibly. Like there's probably guys where it's like, oh, had I known, like he can, like I heard good things about his breaking ball, but I didn't know he was spinning at 3,000 RPM, right? Like, and a lot of the the rankings are based on conversations that we're having with people, scouts and different people in front offices or player development departments all across the game, right? So we're having those conversations, but especially if it's about an amateur player, they might not necessarily have access to that player's specific pitch data that, that we get from a TrackMan. Whereas if you have a little bit more of that granular data, I think it can really benefit.
Cool. Have you seen any scenario where all of a sudden getting data has hurt a guy?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say kind of cut the other way too, right? We were like, oh, like heard good things about this guy's, fastball movement or something else. And then you look at the data and you're like, oh, maybe it's not
dead zone.
Yeah, quite what we were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that too, where guys have come in and, they have an explosive fastball according to a lot, right? We get told it usually before, or like, maybe their advisor will reach out ahead of time and then we get them on actual data and, the pitch is flat or the pitch just isn't moving the way they think it's moving. So really cool. As sort of the landscape changes now, you've been somewhat of a pioneer in going to a lot of these international places, Dominican Republic to name one, right? And starting scouting a lot of these young amateur players who, in the past maybe didn't have the exposure needed to sort of get them into these positions. How have you seen that transform now since you're sort of leading the march on this?
It's been, I started doing it in 2008, and it's totally different now than it was back then. And, things just changed so quickly. Even, even the last few years, things have changed quite a bit. But, I would be calling around to international scouts talking about players in, 2008, 2009, 2010. And, there were players who were signing for, the money wasn't quite, as big as it is today, but, still signing for, 7-figure bonuses. And, they would be basing those decisions off of very limited game looks, like a lot of workout type stuff. Oh, this guy, great body, runs well, throws well, takes a great BP, ton of bat speed. We can see some of the, the raw tools in a workout, but you weren't, maybe you could bring the players into your, your academy and in the Dominican Republic and set up some games that way at times, or see them take, live BP, that kind of stuff. But a lot of the decisions were being made off of a very limited sample of games. And now I think the game culture really has changed a lot, especially in the Dominican Republic, where, the kids are playing in a lot more games. It's showing up in, some of the polish and the instincts that the kids have for the game from a young age. Now you still go and, you're seeing kids who are, 16, 15, 14, 13, like they're going to make, the general dumb mistakes that you always see from kids that age that kind of leave you scratching your head. But the amount of games that players are playing now is much different, and just the amount of resources too that I think teams are devoting to international scouting has increased significantly. I think the scouting departments in general are bigger, and teams are being more rigorous to try build more history on these players.
Well, it makes total sense to have this transformation. I heard a stat the other day, and whether it's completely true or not, but that the MLB is 48% foreign. And if you have an organization that is almost half foreign, to now double, triple down on your foreign scouting only makes sense. How much do you think social media has now influenced sort of not just the rankings, but like the exposure for a lot of these kids?
Yeah, I think it's definitely changed things. I know, I've had teams tell me, they're like, oh yeah, first time I saw a player was when you posted him on your Instagram, and we kind of followed up and ended up signing players in some cases. So I think that's pretty unusual for that to happen. But the ability that everybody has a video camera in their pocket now, where you can take video, and it's of varying quality, right? Like sometimes it's good, sometimes it looks like somebody shot it on like a BlackBerry from 200 yards away, and it's like trying to look at like a little ant through a chain link fence or something. But But yeah, I mean, it can definitely help because you can just see players from all around the country, and it's not the same as seeing a player live and seeing him in
Sure.
person and all that. But you can get a glimpse for a player's swing and things like that. So just to be able to have that kind of instantaneous information that really wasn't available even probably like 5-10 years ago,
Right.
I think it's a big change for kids both here domestically and internationally too, I think.
Now, how have you seen any scenarios where, like, let's say an individual's social media, where that's actually hindered some of their sort of recruitment or rankings because of maybe just overexposing themselves or shedding light on something or an attitude or something like that may have hindered them?
For the rankings, it wouldn't really do like it wouldn't really hinder anything, at least for what we do. But certainly for if you're a college coach and you're recruiting a player, or you're a scout, you're an area scout looking to
Right.
draft a player in your area, like, yeah, you want to know everything you can about that player. You really want to make sure you've done your homework on everything, both on the field and off the field. And if you see a player posting things that he really shouldn't be doing, or he thought, oh, this is just ephemeral content that I was posting on a Instagram story or
Right.
Snapchat or something, like, no, like somebody might
Screenshot
find that
it.
they're going to screenshot it. Like, it could be one of your friends or somebody who you think is your friend, or somebody could share that around. So definitely important to be cognizant of what you're posting on social media too.
Right. When you look at tools, right? And I was listening to one of your podcasts, I think it was like number 25, something like that, where you guys were really discussing what tools jumped out at you the most. Let's take that from a pitcher's perspective, right? What tools are sort of those, maybe we'll take like generic, like your most important tools that they must possess, and then what's some intangibles that you've seen really matter for guys?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for kind of the foundation of a good delivery, good arm action, and that's again, it's not like a cookie cutter thing, right? There's so many different guys who throw so many different ways, and just the way one kid throws who's 5'10" would not necessarily be the same way as somebody who's 6'5", built a very different
Sure.
way. Different elasticity to his limbs and the way he moves. So you're not necessarily saying, oh, he needs to throw a certain way, but you're looking for somebody who's throwing without a ton of effort. But again, guys can throw with effort and it still works. But generally when you're younger, trying to see a guy with generate that easy velocity, you're looking at arm speed too, where, okay, like, yeah, he's throwing, this 16-year-old kid is topping at, 89, 90 right now, but you can see he has so much more room to get stronger, and he has the arm speed that suggests that, hey, once this kid puts on another, 25, 30 pounds, that, that fastball that's topping out at 89, 90 might be 95 or might be 98 within a few years. So, yeah, you're looking at that. The feel to manipulate the off-speed stuff, particularly for me, the breaking ball, I think, is really important. It's something where it's not completely unteachable. I think obviously there are things you can do to improve a breaking ball and a slider in particular, maybe more so than a curveball, just in my experience. But I do think there is an innate feel that some pitchers have to be able to spin the
100%.
baseball.
Yeah.
That's just a gift that they have. And just because you can spin a ball 2,900 RPM doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have a good curveball. But
Right.
but it certainly has the good kind of building block components that you're looking for. And change up for me is more of a pitch where, like you said, there's if you throw 90 plus miles an hour in high school, you're probably not going to throw your changeup that much, depending on your level of competition that you're facing. So that to me is a pitch where even if a guy doesn't really throw one in high school, that's something that, not always, but it's less of a concern if a guy doesn't have a changeup that's any good in high school compared to he can't really spin a breaking ball, because we've seen guys, just pick up a changeup that they never even really threw in high school
Right.
and end up having a really good one in pro ball when somebody kind of teaches them how to throw with the right grip and maintain their arm speed while they're throwing it too.
Yeah, I think that what an interesting comment there too, like on the difficulty of learning a breaking ball, and I couldn't agree more. There are biases when first getting a kid. It's part of our evaluation. We want to understand the bias at the forearm and bias at the shoulder, right? Are they going to be more of a supination guy or a pronation guy, right? It's going to indicate whether or not we're really going to be able to attack this slider, or are we going to try and go towards a curveball type mentality, right? And I mean, as scary as this sounds, it's got to be 95% of the time when we get a kid coming in, he's like, oh yeah, I primarily throw a curveball and that thing plats like a slider. And then the vice versa.
Yeah, I hear it. Like, I'll ask kids, like, oh, like, is that do you throw like curveball or is that slider? And they'll say, yeah, like curveball. And it's like, well, it kind of goes like this way. So, yeah.
And the spin rate factor on that is, I again couldn't agree more, right? When we get guys in and you teaching them a pitch, maybe you're going to migrate 100, maybe 200, RPMs away from where they were first starting out, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, if all of a sudden you're teaching a kid a grip, and I can think back, we had a kid recently where, he's young, 26, and he was like, I need to develop an off-speed pitch. I really don't have one. It wasn't on our radar to really focus with him on that this offseason. It was really about getting strong and protecting him. So we started working on it and gave him just the very first grip out with the slider, and he couldn't throw it for a strike. It wasn't going to be a productive pitch for him right now, but he spun it at 2,800, like opening pitch. So I'm like, okay, so we have something to work with here.
Yeah. And especially there's some kids, they really vary as far as their knowledge of pitching or even just literally how to grip the ball, right? Like, I was talking to, just an international director recently about a kid who they had recently signed. And they were like, yeah, we first saw him and, kind of he had an issue throwing his breaking ball. And then we were like, show me how you grip the ball. And he had this all like jacked up grip on his, like, something you would just never teach. Like, I don't know who taught him how to throw it, but it wasn't somebody who kind of knew too much about what they were doing. And they're like, all right, so we showed him like a new slider grip. And like, by the third one, we were like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, there's something in there. So sometimes, yeah, it is just as basic as like, learning the right grips. But yeah, there are just kids who have that natural innate feel for spinning the baseball, which is just, even before we had all of this more ubiquitous data available to us on spin rates and all the other metrics that we have, that's just kind of always been something that I've thought is there just through experience and talking to guys who've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 plus years. It's like, maybe you can power through a slider. There are different things I think you can do with that pitch, but especially for to be able to throw a true curveball, there's just an innate feel for spin.
It's a very hard pitch to throw. The true curveball, we're obviously talking like 12-6 realm of that curveball, right? The slider, yes, especially with the emergence of like now you have gyro sliders for a guy who just really can't get break on it, right? And just needs a ball that's going to move into a different plane. Or you have, now they have these, you can have a sweep slider, right? And then you have a slutter now, which is going to be somewhere in between that and a cutter. And, these pitches have really added or aided kids in that. Ultimately, I think they've emerged from guys just not really being able to get that traditional pitch. Whereas like the higher level guys, some of them are developing it as, I need something to stand out. I need something to differentiate me. But these younger kids come in and asking like, hey, I need to learn a cutter. Hey, I need to learn like, I got to get more sweep on my side. I'm like, dude, you need to throw it for a strike. We can't even get it over the plate. So it doesn't even count as a pitch right now because you're not getting anybody to swing at it. But really, really cool. One of the other areas, right? And, we had a sort of convo before we started here, a little offline, that just, the sort of like state of high school baseball and how some of these higher level athletes, it's really hard to judge them because they're playing against really poor competition. And, and it makes it difficult to wonder, yes, clearly he's better than the competition he's playing, but does that mean he's good enough to be ranked really high and potentially play at the, elite of the elite level? How important have you viewed showcases in changing that landscape a little bit, or I guess equating that landscape?
I mean, it's great to be able to see kids over the summer. I think especially for the scouts that are making decisions on these players as far as who to draft and line up their boards, and for us too at Baseball America, because you're seeing kids, not just the competition, but you're seeing them swinging wood bats too throughout the summer, and especially when you're at the see them at bigger events like PDP that MLB has, East Coast Pro, area codes, sometimes All-American Games too, although that's a little kind of funky sometimes. Like everybody's going out there for like an inning at a time and just blowing gas by people, and you're facing a different guy every at bat, and you're probably maybe getting like 2 or 3 at bats. So a little bit more limited utility to that. But whether it's there or a big tournament like Jupiter, where it's good to see guys facing good quality competition throughout the summer, playing, with wood bats, kind of all in the same environment together. So I think it's super helpful compared to the spring where it's like, especially for a hitter, it's tough because, you're seeing a really good hitter sometimes going up against a guy throwing 78 miles an hour. It's like, well, like, and then the hitters, they all complain about it too. They're like, oh, I have to change everything. And
I was going to say that probably goes both ways, right?
Yeah.
Whether he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't, because he's got to go 4 for 4, and it's tough to hit when it's below hitting speed.
With the pitchers, it's a little. I mean, it's obviously better to see them facing good competition because that's just better for everybody. But it's weird, right? Because I think pitchers there's just more inherent risk with pitchers. There's so much more that can go wrong with injuries, and then a lot more projection that still needs to come for the stuff in a lot of cases. But you can still get a good feel for everything a pitcher does as far as his operation on the mound and just the raw stuff coming out of his hand. Whether he's facing really good competition as the hitters he's facing, or really poor competition. Obviously, the better hitters are going to be a better test for him, and you can get away with more against the lower quality competition. But it's a little bit easier to evaluate, I think, a pitcher independent of the competition he's facing more so than it is with a hitter.
And now, so like what you indicated there with some of the All-American Games, right? That's very similar setup to, like, let's say a traditional showcase, right? It's got to be really hard to judge a player off of something there. And I would imagine those are really just eye-opening to you, and then you're obviously following the guy from that on, right?
Yeah, and each showcase is different, and the ones that I think the pro scouts run at like East Coast Pro or something like that is really good, or there's some really good ones that are run internationally where you do get a good, you can see a guy that's maybe at shortstop take enough ground balls to really get a good feel for his, at least in a workout setting, how his hands work, how his feet work, his arm strength, his throwing stroke. Now it's obviously different, just watching a kid take infield in a workout than it is in a game, because the kid's looks all pretty dancing around at shortstop, and you're like, it took you like 7 seconds to get the ball out to first base. Like he's safe. Doesn't matter how like smooth and fluid you looked. But yeah, I mean, you get a sense for a player's tools and his speed, his arm strength, some of the mechanical things that he does defensively and then offensively in BP too. But at the same time, that swing that you have in BP is your BP swing, and then the swing that you have in the game. Of course. Sometimes it's the same, and sometimes it's not. It's a lot different when you don't know whether the it's not your BP guy throwing the, grooving it to you right down the pipe.
The same from a pitcher, right?
Yeah.
We got plenty of guys that can bring it in a bullpen, and then you put them in a game, and the emotions and the psychology element starts to come in, and they just can't perform in the same way.
Yeah. I mean, like in the bigger showcases where, they're just running a whole bunch of guys in and, here's like 4 or 5 ground balls and they got a radar gun on a kid. And it's like every kid is just airing it out, trying to throw it as hard as they can. It's like, I don't care about that. Like, first of all, you just took like 7 shuffle steps it's like, it's not even an infield throw.
Right.
At that point, I'm really like, what the scouts with MLB clubs are looking for is more, how are you moving your feet? How are your hands? How are your actions at shortstop? Not just, how hard can you throw from, 4 or 5 shuffle steps from shortstop.
Right. Very true.
Yeah.
All right. What would you say is your favorite attribute to sort of point out, recognize in, let's say, a young pitcher? Like something that just like, maybe you point this out more often than not. Maybe it's like a bias of yours, and maybe it's something that, you don't really see a lot of other people talking about.
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if there's like a ton of like hidden secrets that like I know about or like we know about that nobody else is talking about. But I do think that that feel for spin I think is really important for me on the breaking ball. I mean, there's even an old scouting adage, and I don't know how much truth there is to it. I don't even know how you could prove it empirically, but if a guy can really spin a curveball and spin it with some power relative to the velocity that he's showing right now, that it can be an indication that there's more velocity to come. I don't know if it's true. Cool. It seems like there's something to it.
There's like a somewhat linear progression from spin rate to velocity. So
yeah, or you see a guy who's he's throwing 88, but he's throwing like a real hard, tight curveball at like 79 or 78, and you're like, it doesn't like.
Yeah, it doesn't add up.
It doesn't make sense. Like he should be throwing harder, right?
Yep.
Or the curveball shouldn't be that hard, but it is already. So maybe there's more velocity coming. But even more so than the velocity projection itself, if that's true or not, just that ability to spin a breaking ball, I think, can portend really good things. And if a kid doesn't have that, I mean, if you don't have it at 14, like okay, that's one thing. Like
right.
Your spin rate is should still be able to increase over time from that young an age. But if we're talking about a high school senior and there's really lack of feel for spin there, that's a concern. Whereas if again, it doesn't have to be a completely refined pitch, and some kids have trouble landing obviously in the strike zone, then that can be developed. But if you have that, innate feel for spinning a baseball, I think that's a really good sign.
The way I loved that you said there isn't some magical secret, right? And I got to imagine one of the big things from these rankings perspectives is how consistent can this guy show up when playing, right? Because, I mean, we've all seen, and we've certainly seen some high school guys just like they lock into this one like magical moment, especially in the off season, and like they just light up the radar gun or light up the, we're running lives, and they just mow through like 3 or 4 pro guys, and it's like, oh wow, this guy's going to be the next coming. But then he can't put it all together on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and it depends too, because you can, especially like the younger you go, maybe the less important that consistency is. Because if you're seeing it, in flashes, it at least gives you signals or maybe hope that over time, that consistency can come. But if you're seeing, like big wild swings from a guy from start to start or game to game with a hitter, that's it's obviously going to be a hindrance for him.
Yeah. All right. So advice for a, let's say high school athlete, right? Advice for them in terms of how they should be approaching sort of their career at this point, in what you've seen from those that you viewed as being highly successful.
At like a certain age or
Sure.
for,
Let's go. We'll start with that freshman, sophomore age.
yeah, I mean, if it's something that you think you can make, whether it's a, professional career out of, if that's your goal, or your goal is to play in college baseball, I mean, take it seriously. And I mean, I guess treat it like a job almost. Obviously, you have other priorities that obviously are going to be important with school and your family and all that. But, like we were talking about, I go down to the Dominican Republic all the time, and, the kids there, or Venezuela, are, training like year round and almost every day from the time they're 13 years old, or even younger, to try to sign with a major league club. I mean, that's, part of why I think you see so many kids there who, just the shortstop actions look so different at a young age from a lot of the kids we see here at different events. And it's because you can, they have a coach hitting them. You can have a coach hit you fungos 100 times a day, every day. Obviously the weather is an advantage too, and that helps. But, just being able, they treat it like it's a job. And I'm not saying that's like, the best system either. Like, there are certainly drawbacks to the system
Sure.
internationally. But, if one of your goals is to play professional baseball, like, your competition is not just, the other kids who you see in your area, or even the other kids who, from around the region or around the country who, you think are really good players. It's like we talked about, professional baseball is heavily international. So there's competition that's coming not just from
Globally.
the States, but globally, all around the world, especially in, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Cuba, Bahamas is growing now. So there's players all around the world now who are, taking this very seriously and kind of treating it like it is a job from a young age. So I think that's, just having that focus to it, if that's what you want to be, what you want to do as a career, or play at a high level in college, I think is super important.
It's such a great point, because I mean, you all too often, right? We take this context, and just as general humans, right? We view the world as being pretty small. It's your context is generally the habitation that you live in on a general week, right? And then expanding on that, even if you're looking at social media, you're generally following people that are just like you, or are your friends and everything else. So it's difficult oftentimes for these kids to have this perspective of the fact that there are other people out here in this world that are growing up in a totally different society than
Definitely.
you, and their priorities are vastly different. And as you indicated, whether that's good or bad, it is a fact. And whether that allows them or affords them the mentality to just say, this is all or nothing, I think is very difficult to compete against. And, why we probably see a lot of the American baseball players, struggling to get to those final tiers of this, because I think it's hard to put yourself in that perspective when you've just never felt that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I like doing just with my, especially my Instagram account, is just being able to show people different players, especially amateur players from, all across the country and all across the world that, maybe you wouldn't otherwise get to see normally.
Right.
So people have that sense of like, oh, like, here's what the top players look like in the United States when they're, 15, 16, 17. Here's what they look like in the Dominican Republic when they're the same age, or Venezuela or Cuba too. So just to kind of give the people, like you said, that global perspective of players.
Because it's difficult. It's difficult for them to put that into perspective, I think, sometimes. And this is why I said it's really great that you've been pioneering this since 2008, because it should change their perspective. And it is a battle we fight the most from a performance perspective, is getting them to take ownership and understand how difficult this road ahead is going to be. We had a a guest on previously, actually earlier this week, but and he made a great point at the end. He said he asked most parents, "Do you believe that your child's going to be a billionaire one day?" And, their knee-jerk reaction is, "Oh, no, of course not." Right. And he's, his reply back is, then what makes you believe they're going to be a Major League Baseball player? There's more billionaires in the United States than there is Major League Baseball pitchers. And, that's a damning statement to you when you have this mentality of it's almost entitlement because we live in America, right? And we live these lives that are privileged across the globe, right? Mm-hmm. Not that we don't work for them. I'm not going down that path, but it's, we're not afforded the perspective sort of. And I just think it's amazing that you're providing that on this stage, and especially because so many of these kids follow you. So you're using your platform to, whether they understand it sort of consciously or subconsciously, they are getting educated on the fact that the world is huge and the talent is much larger than just that summer league that you played in this past year.
Yeah, I mean, every time I go down to the Dominican Republic, I mean, it's my favorite country in the world to go to just for baseball because you have like all the best athletes there grow up wanting to play baseball. It's not like here in the States where you have kids playing, basketball, football, soccer, lacrosse. It's all fractured across different sports. Every little boy down there grows up wanting to, be the next Big Papi, right? Mm-hmm. Or Fernando Tatis Jr. or Juan Soto right now. I mean, I see kids doing the Soto shuffle after a ball down there. It's pretty funny, but yeah, every time I go down there, it's a great country for just like true grassroots baseball. But every time I come home, I'm just like, man, I just have gratitude for being fortunate to be born here in the States and just seeing the way some kids grow up there where like I'll post videos just driving to a field and it's like you're one moment you're driving past this like beautiful beach on the Malecone, and then you're rolling up to the field and just right in front of the field is this whole neighborhood of houses with tin roofs and no indoor plumbing, and that's where a lot of the players grow up in different levels of affluence there. It's not obviously everybody, but there's definitely big league players and guys signing contracts to come through the minor league system who do grow up in that environment. So definitely have a lot of gratitude every time just for the way I was able to grow up.
Awesome. Yeah, it's that old saying, hard times make hard people, right? And they become tough and they're resilient to a lot of those things. But, I would say the advantage to some of the American-based players is access, right? And
oh yeah,
they need to heed that access more and more and more. And again, a different previous guest had just indicated that one of his biggest regrets was not getting a coach at an early enough age. And, it speaks to volume to what you're talking about. While yes, they may all have coaches and they may, have the ability to get somebody to hit them fungos 100 times a day, they may not have access to the technology. They may not have access to the, data scientists that exist here, or the strength coaches with, 20 years of experience in a field that's changing every 5 minutes, right? So I just think not heeding the advantages you have in front of you is probably one of the biggest mistakes.
Yeah, I think it seems like to me, by the time a kid is maybe going into his senior year or sometime before that, at that point, a lot of the guys who are going to be, draft prospects have kind of recognized, actually, yeah, my future might not be in college baseball. It might be like I could really get drafted, and they start to take it even more seriously, and the focus gets even greater, and the work they're putting into it really ticks up. Whereas I see guys who might be sophomores in high school or juniors in high school, where I'm like, man, this is like one of the best players in the country, and I don't even think he realizes that yet. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of, cases the other way around where a kid
Sure.
thinks he's incredible and then kind of goes out and is going to get humbled once he sees how much talent there is in the rest of the country or the rest of the world. But yeah, I mean, if you can, like I was saying before, you can start taking that focus and taking it very seriously from a younger age, I think it just gives you another leg up on everybody else.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for today. This was incredibly informative and enlightening, and I'm extremely grateful that we got to have this conversation.
I appreciate you having me here. This was awesome. We should do it again.
Yeah, absolutely.